Hey astronauts, it's me, Brandy from Astro-Tarot Research, and I am back with another astrology video. So if you watched my last tarot video, then you know that I said I was going to be gone for a minute to conduct this research in Mars transiting Aries, which is going on right now. So it is affecting all of our lives and everything that's happening in the world. I do want to let you guys know that I'll probably be following a similar pattern for now where, I do a few tarot videos and I do a few astrology videos, but that's just what I wanted to do for now. You guys know how my schedule changes. Do know that I am working from behind the scenes. If you don't see me, don't think I'm just like on some hiatus or on some vacation. Granted, I will be going on vacation for 2 weeks, but like that's just, trust me, most of the time I'm doing some really in-depth research that's happening here. This time I have tons and tons of paper. Like it's like this is like a freaking book here, like a mini manual on Mars and Aries. Let's just jump into this video. I don't want to waste any more of your time, but I'm sure you guys want this information. If you watched my Uranus and Taurus video on how that's going to affect us until the year 2026, then you guys know that I'm going to be like looking at my papers a lot just because I have so much information to give you. With this video, I'll be using nakshatras. So if you guys aren't familiar with the nakshatras, like let's say you're a beginner in astrology, you don't know what a moon sign is, you don't know what a sun sign is, you're not sure what degrees are or seconds or minutes or planets and rulerships, you have no clue what's going on, I will find some links and I'll put them below for astrologers and people who've done videos that can teach you all about the beginnings and all that's happening with astrology. I can understand how difficult things can be and not knowing where to start. So Mars is currently transiting through Aries, and this transit of Mars through Aries will happen from June 27th to the end of January 6th, 2021. The last time Mars was in Aries this long was August 27th, 1988 through January 19th, 1989. Okay, and what's funny is because Joe Biden was actually running for president sort of around this time. He announced his candidacy in 1987, but it was for the 1988 election, but he dropped out due to controversies surrounding him plagiarizing, I believe, speeches and essays and etc. I do want to clarify before we get started that I am speaking about Western placement. The nakshatras are a Vedic Vedic astrology tool, and I'm not that great at pronunciation as it's not my normal culture, so excuse me if I like butcher any words. Basically, to give you an overall simplification, nakshatras are certain degrees in a sign. So every sign like Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Leo, Virgo, they all have 30 degrees. So and these 30 degrees are broken up into 27 nakshatra placements. So 0 to 18 degrees would be one nakshatra, and 13 to 26 degrees would be another nakshatra, and so on and so forth until we get to 27. Okay, so I wanted to break that down for you just to give you a simplification if you really are totally clueless, and you can pause the video here and look things up in those links that I will be having below. In the sign of Western Aries, there are 3 nakshatra placements. That is Uttara Bhadrapada, Revati, and Ashvini. So Uttara Bhadrapada is connected to the planet Saturn, Revati is connected to the planet Mercury, and Ashvini is connected to Ketu, or if you're more into Western astrology, the South Node. Each nakshatra has its own characteristics and themes, and if you go even deeper into it, where you break it up into different padas, there's 4 padas for every nakshatra, then that's also going to have different themes and etc. But we're not going into that. We're gonna give you the overall picture of nakshatras because that gets narrow enough when we're breaking up signs. For an example, let's take Ashvini. So you guys can skip ahead if you want to, if you don't need this intro part, but I feel like you'll be very compelled and very interested in this part if you want to know more about nakshatras. I need to stop slouching. I need to work on my posture. So let's say we want to start with Ashvini. Ashvini can be a particularly surprising nakshatra. This year, Mars and Uranus will be in Ashvini around Christmas Day, plus the moon, which is a daily predictor, will also be conjunct Uranus around this time. The last time Mars and Uranus were in Ashvini, there was a tornado that killed over 216 people and injured over 700 people. It was the 4th deadliest tornado in US history, and the next day struck the 5th deadliest tornado in US history in Gainesville, Georgia, killing 203 people and injuring 1,600 people. Uranus can bring about very surprising and, unexpected events, as well as Mars itself is a planet that's very aggressive and can be very, impulsive, reactive, and violent. And Ashvini in itself can just be a very, like I said, surprising and deadly nakshatra. That theme comes up very much so with Ashvini. What it does is it can end lives. I've just noticed that theme come up with Ashvini a lot. Not to say that other nakshatra placements don't do this. There are quite a few that do this more than others. I think with every nakshatra placement there can be an element of chaos to it, but particularly Ashvini comes up a lot for a lot of deadly events. So all three combined together can bring about unexpected deaths, pain, injury, sort of like shocking moments that feel distressing, like very crisis-like situations. Also, because Uranus rules innovation and Mars rules technical areas, and Ashvini is also connected to like new beginnings. In general, it can be used for starting something and being innovative. What also happened around this time is technological industrial advancements. So we had the super chief railroad between Chicago and LA. Huge sort of productive event that really revolutionizes travel and obviously is going to pertain to business, helping the economy, providing jobs. So there's a lot of just industrial changes going on. That's a more positive thing that those combinations can bring. This event is happening, like I said, around Christmas Day this year, 2020. So we can probably expect either there to be some sort of maybe extreme disaster, some sort of crisis situation that's very shocking, something that may bring about a high mortality rate, or something that's like an attack, or something that causes fear or freak weather, because I know Uranus has this strong connection to also freak weather, which is why we had those tornadoes. Or we could have things having to do with technological innovation, technological advancements, or even discoveries. I know they're trying to push this 5G thing forward, like even though other countries already have it going on. There's also people trying to innovate and create a cure for, the coronavirus going on now. So maybe we find some shocking discoveries and new revelations in regard to the cure. This can also indicate division, or just a split in overall efforts and ideas among individuals, because Ashvini is the first nakshatra. So in a way, it becomes very, very individualistic. It's known to be like a lot of K2 ruled nakshatras are known to sort of like march to the beat of their own drum. So it can create almost like a split in a way of doing things or decisions being made. Granted, that's more going into towards Bharani, but what I've noticed is a lot of the times when nakshatras are right next to each other, they sort of bring about each other's energy, especially when we get closer to like the end of Ashvini and we start going into Bharani, and we see that we're splitting up our individualities, but we're also trying to find a way to come together, okay? Another event that occurred last time Uranus and Mars conjunct in Ashvini was the premiere of Peter and the Wolf. Now, this is like a brief sidetrack, but I thought this could help those who are interested better understand Ashvini. Peter and the Wolf, the original version of the story, is about a boy who captures the wolf and with the help of hunters takes the wolf to the zoo. In a sense, Peter tames and domesticates the wolf, therefore making Peter and the Wolf a story about taming the beast and man's victory over nature. In the story, Peter is taking something wild and untamed and making it submissive and domesticated. This metaphorically can be seen as man's victory over human nature and the animalistic side of human nature. Ashvini in this case is best symbolized by the wolf. Now, granted, today's wolves are more timid due to like a lot of hunting going on. Naturally, wolves are like Ashvini, very aggressive, are less fearful, more willing to face predators, more likely to attack creatures unprovoked. And this energy is very much like Ashvini. Ashvini is just raw, uninhibited, dominating, aggressive, and fearless wolf energy. When it's more free to do what it wants to do, it doesn't think about the consequences of its actions. It doesn't think about sort of how its nature affects people and the world around it. Okay, Ashvini is very individualistic. So I just want to help you guys think about the nature of it. It's only when Ashvini becomes controlled and more dominated by a powerful force that it becomes more timid and cautious. So this is why you see Ketu ruled people become more paranoid in time when they start to lean in towards the manic side of Ketu. For example, we can take Sun and Ashvini ruled Hitler, who is a very like severe, obviously, example of this nakshatra, who took on the more violent and extreme nature of Ashvini. And you can see the more cruel and the more unhinged his actions became, sort of like really diving into the nature of the untamed nature of Ashvini. The more paranoia set in, the more psychotic nature, the more isolation set in, it just got bad, okay? So when you lean in towards the more chaotic side of Ashvini, then you also get the more negative effects of this. That's what happens when Ashvini goes unchecked. I wanted to say this is the reason why we have so many violent attacks during Ashvini transits, like when planets go through Ashvini. And this is why you have a lot of Ketu ruled people sort of committing a lot of different gun violence, which I've noticed. I haven't done a full-blown study on school shooters and mass violence and stuff like that, but it does happen with a lot with Ketu ruled people. As a result of acting like the headless being that Ketu is, you know, acting in a way where you're not thinking about the consequences of your action, we can start to see the other characteristics of Ketu ruled nakshatra, Ashvini, Magha, and Mula. We start to see where the isolation sets in. When you sort of act without regards to others, then you will generate a negative perception. You'll have a lack of understanding of people. You'll also just feel very much alone, okay? You'll feel rejected by society, which is a very common theme among a lot of Ketu ruled people. Like I said, it doesn't actually have to just be a total disregard for others. Another thing that happens with, you know, Ketu ruled people, not just Ashvini, is they'll act in a way that is against the mainstream behaviors of society. So what I mean by this is you can see a lot of Ketu ruled people having interests, like let's say they're really into, I don't know, collecting rocks or something like that. So they'll have interests that a lot of people won't be interested in. Which goes to that more individualistic aspect of Ketu ruled nakshatras. They're like, oh, I'm really interested in rock collecting and I love rocks and look at this rock's cool and da 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 da. And so you'll find them in a lot of like different like sub-genre areas, or just having a lot of unusual interests which other people may not relate to, and that is another thing in turn that can make them more isolated, okay? But at the same time, I've noticed too, with the more positive Ketu things, is I was just watching this show and I thought it was just so funny because they said it so well, is like sometimes the people that you end up pushing away end up being the strongest ones of all, which is something that I've noticed a lot with, I think Rahu people too as well, but we're just talking about Ketu ruled nakshatras. But I've noticed that as well, as because they become more isolated, because they are no longer afraid of what someone may think of them, because they live in their truth. A lot of the times these individuals, if they lean into the more positive K2 qualities, can be just very strong people, just very brave. Like, I don't know what other word. I just saw this theme coming up over and over again. Like, I would research people who had strong K2 energy, good and bad, and something I noticed that a lot of people kept commenting over and over again is they would say fearless, brave, courageous, truthful. Like, those were the more positive aspects. Like, they would just show them being just like a sense of power that comes with this nakshatra. I got a little bit off track, but basically what I was trying to say, because a lot of the negative aspects of Ashvini can lead us to being isolated, and in a sense we feel vulnerable. This is why most of the humans sort of choose to tame the inner beast or tame the more animalistic side of themselves, okay? This is why we don't punch everyone that makes us mad. This is why we don't, you know, throw tantrums because Starbucks ran out of frappuccinos. This is why we don't rob banks when we can't pay our rent or something like that, because we don't want to have this sense of being unable to connect and a lack of relatability, okay? YouTube is sort of like built upon relatability, right? People have stands, people follow others, people connect with YouTubers because they feel like, in a sense, they can relate. They feel like, in a sense, this person belongs to their tribe, that this person has some sort of understanding or connection to them, okay? And that is why what follows Ashvini is a Venus-ruled nakshatra, Bharani. So Venus rules nakshatras represents societal norms as well as societal morality. And I talked about this quite a bit in the Uranus and Taurus video. So go ahead and check that out, where I mentioned all about, you know, Venus ruled nakshatra, Bharani, and how it creates those rules and regulations and the delicacies, the things that we practice, the manners of society. So as humans, we don't want to be alone. We want to belong. We want positive responses from others. We want to have others relate to us. We want to have other people understand us. We want friends, we want families, we want lovers, we want to be loved, and we want to give love. That's normally the baseline for most humans. Most people would want at least one aspect of that. And this is why we have that societal structure, right? Because when we have these societal structures, it helps us to create trust and understanding in one another. It is through societal norms and Venus ruled nakshatras that we find a way to sort of connect and relate to each other, okay? Another way to sort of look at it is Venus ruled nakshatras kind of rule socialization. And I read this example of line that was a really great, really great example of societal morality. Like, let's say you see someone rob a bank, but then the person who robbed that bank, let's say you see them give that money to an orphanage. And I forgot the name of this study or who they asked, but they gave it to two groups of people, and they said most people said, oh, I was going to turn them in. And to the second group, they said, oh, most people said that they wouldn't turn that person in. Now, depending on what they heard the scientists say about what other people did became what they decided to do themselves. When other people were told that most people turn the bank robber in, then they decided, okay, well, I'm going to go with the societal morale and I'm going to say I would turn them in as well. But when most people heard that they wouldn't turn the person in, then they decided they would go with that societal norm and not turn people in as well, okay? So that is what sort of I mean by when I start talking about society morality, okay? It's less Ashvini, like Ashvini and other Ketu rule nakshatras become more individualistic. They say, I'm gonna go by my own rules. And then when we get to Bharani, we say, okay, well, you can't go by your own rules because we live in a society and there's gotta be a standard of living. There's gotta be a standard of what we can deem to be acceptable. Otherwise, it's gonna be a lot of chaos, which you see Ashvini sort of being a lot of chaotic nature because everyone has their own individuality. If we all just sort of act as individuals all the time, you know, there'd be a lot of messiness going on in the world. There still kind of is, right? Another thing that I've noticed is sometimes a lot of Ketu ruled people were described as like psychopaths. And if you look up the definition of psychopath, it's defined by having antisocial behavior, right? So it's like the opposite of being socialized. But we have one nakshatra, Ashvini, being antisocial. We have the next nakshatra being Bharani, being socialization. Obviously, both nakshatras have their good and bad. I don't want to get into that with Bharani and all that stuff lately. I thought it was just the most fitting explanation that the Ketu ruled nakshatras were described as being more antisocial behavior. That was just a small tangent on nakshatras. I feel like that was way too long and it was not really the point of the video, but luckily Ashvini is one of the nakshatras that is in the video. So when we get to that nakshatra, you can apply everything that I have said here for that nakshatra placement. I do want to put this sort of disclaimer in it that this sort of violent sociopathic behavior is only one aspect of Ashvini and Ketu ruled nakshatras, and same with the socialization for Bharani. Same way Ashvini can be like super out there or very disagreeable, it can also be highly compassionate. It can be one of the most, you know, loving nakshatra placements you can have. You can just create somebody who's very compassionate. So before I just start on all the astrological happenings with Mars and Aries, I do want to get another disclaimer out the way. No, it's not going to be another 20-minute tangent, I hope. But basically, I want to mention that when I started researching, you know, Revati and Uttara Bhadrapada, which Mars is in Revati as I filmed this, which makes sense when I get into the video, you'll understand it makes sense. What I found in my research is these two nakshatras are very much like intertwined together. A lot of the themes that come up in Uttara Bhadrapada come up in Revati as well, and vice versa. So in Vedic astrology, Uttara Bhadrapada and Revati mainly fall into the sign of Pisces. And so when I was looking into this, I kind of felt like that sort of makes sense because Pisces is like this wavy energy where everything's connecting and you don't know one line from the next and what boundary is where, and it's just like this, you know, it's a watery nakshatra. It rules the ocean. It just seems like endless. So for me, I kind of felt like, oh yeah, that makes sense. It reminds me of, because Pisces is also connected to forests. If you've ever been in a park or a forest or like a strongly wooded area, then you know as you're walking through it, it can be hard to tell your way. You can get lost in the thick of it, which is like Uttara Bhadrapada and Revati. When you start to dive really deep into them, then it can be hard to tell them apart because they're so intertwined. And I didn't have this issue with other nakshatra placements. Like when I was doing the Uranus and Taurus video, things were very clear. It's like you have to look at things from a bird's eye view to understand what's going on in the forest. I hope that was a good example. I hope I didn't just throw you off and you're like, what is she even talking about? Both nakshatras dealt with the theme of bringing corrupt people to justice, particularly mass murderers, you know, mass abusers, serial killers. It's usually people who have done more than one crime. It's not like, oh, well, let me arrest this person for selling pot one time. No, this nakshatra was really dealing with people who were committing mass crimes on a large scale. I guess that's the definition of mass, right? Both nakshatras had that theme come up over, so that's what I mean by a lot of things running together. In terms of crimes like domestic violence, I saw that come up more for Revati, and I think that might have to do because of its proximity to Ashvini. One of the key differences that I did want to bring up before we start the video is Uttara Bhadrapada is ruled by Saturn, and Saturn rules things and objects, people underground, things that are hidden away. On a more general level, Saturn can represent hidden talents, hidden objects, hidden people in general, as I was saying. When somebody has strong Saturnian placements, a lot of the times these people will have secrets. Like they'll have secret interests, they'll have secret talents, they'll have secret skills, or their secrets can be a little bit more on the negative side, on the side where they're keeping like an affair hidden or something like that. Where I've noticed with Revati and individuals in general, it's not as if they won't have secrets, but they are less prone to sort of digging for the truth. So somebody who has that very more Uttara Bhadrapada feel to their chart, they're gonna be a little bit more proactive about doing research. And like they do the grunt work, okay? Which makes sense because it's a Saturn ruled nakshatra. So they're going to put in more effort towards cultivating and keeping secrets, if that makes sense. Revati people are more strategic. They're more like, I have the information already, I just gotta know what I need to do with it. Revati is more the execution of an idea. Revati is more likely to represent the end of a chapter or the end of something, which makes sense because it's like, you know, the last nakshatra. So while researching these two nakshatras, I was just thinking to myself how Uttara Bhadrapada sort of reminded me of Scooby-Doo. Like, you may be looking at me like, what is she even talking about? Why does this remind her of Scooby-Doo? So remember how I was saying with Uttara Bhadrapada, it represents sort of like digging for information, trying to find things out, trying to reveal things like, okay, I don't know where this is. I need to find this hidden object. Like, let's say I lost my ring. Okay, I lost my ring. I don't know where it is. I need to find it. I need to dig for it. Is it under my bed? Is it doing this? Is it doing that? And I was just like, this kind of reminds me this energy of like searching for something and then finally, oh, I know where this is. I revealed it. I've got it. I know what it is. I know where it is. I know I found my ring. It just reminded me of the big reveal in Scooby-Doo. So I decided to look up the creators of Scooby-Doo. And what I found was creators of Scooby-Doo, Joe Ruby and Ken Spears, both have Uttara Bhadrapada placements. And I was like, that totally makes sense, right? So Joe Ruby has his sun in Uttara Bhadrapada, while the co-creator Ken Spears has both his Venus and Saturn in Uttara Bhadrapada. So his creativity, his efforts in creating something have to do about revealing. So his creative work shows something being revealed, which makes sense because they have this whole show where the most famous moment has to do with that big reveal with the villain and them saying, you know, I would have gotten away with it if it wasn't for you meddling kids, right? That's totally the energy of Uttara Bhadrapada. It meddles in things, it discovers things, it reveals things. I just thought that that would help you guys sort of distinguish the difference between Uttara Bhadrapada and Revati. Those things are also being revealed in Revati. The grunt work and all that grinding and peeling away and scratching away at something is very Uttara Bhadrapada. So if you got some placements in Uttara Bhadrapada, you're probably really great at research, or if you want to, you know, discover, want to be a detective and reveal villains and corruption and all that stuff, you'd be really great at it. Or if you just want to make discoveries in general, because I've seen Uttara Bhadrapada be good for like scientific discoveries or just uncovering things, it works in that way as well. A Revati theme that I meant to mention before, not even just Revati, but Uttara Bhadrapada and Revati have this theme of all women, you know, all women team, all women leadership, all women campaign, all women, you know, cast or something like that. The best way I saw it described is no more egos, okay? Or no more having to deal with this sense of it's about me, not about the work. Okay, so I know Saturn has to do with the destruction of ego, and a lot of times in charts, men are more connected to the sun than women. So a lot of themes that I saw with Uttara Bhadrapada and Saturn and Uttara Bhadrapada and Revati is this rise in women. So you may even see a lot of stories having to do with like all women, I saw it now. So all women search for cure, all women team searches for the cure for COVID, you know. I just saw that happening a lot, and it's particularly having to do with Uttara Bhadrapada and Revati, even in movies where we have people like, gosh, what was the girl's name in House of Cards? Claire. But at the end of the series, she had an all-female presidential cabinet. So a lot of times, oh, and also another show that I saw, The Politician, another character who was Uttara Bhadrapada wanted to run on the first all-female political ticket. Okay, so that's another thing that Uttara Bhadrapada people and Revati women, you know, will do, where they'll make something all women. Even Rihanna, who is Revati Moon, starred in a movie with the all women cast. Okay, the first was it Ocean's 11? They end up in situations, or they purposely put themselves in situations where they have female dominance, okay, or just like females coming into leaderships and taking power. That can also be another theme when Saturn comes into Aries, or towards the end of Pisces, I believe, where we can have a female leader coming into power. I think there's a thunder and lightning storm happening, so sorry if you hear that in the background and everything. Gosh, I wish my videos weren't so long, but I really want to get this information out there, and I want to make it clear the themes and what's going on in the nakshatras. Let's get started with Uttara Bhadrapada. So Uttara Bhadrapada, we have already experienced this transit. That's right, it's over. Mars was in Uttara Bhadrapada from June 27th through July 17th. Now you don't have to watch this part of the video if you're not interested, but if you really want to know what Mars did while it was in Uttara Bhadrapada, then continue watching. In Uttara Bhadrapada, we have been best focusing our actions and what actions to take regarding COVID-19. So with Uttara Bhadrapada, we don't know how to gain control or work around the virus, but we're starting to come to grips with the extent of the problems and the distress that this virus has truly caused. And we're looking and reflecting on our actions in regards to how others have sort of decided to present solutions to problems in their own countries. Basically, we're focusing on the extent of the problems when we have Mars in Uttara Bhadrapada, and we're still doing that, but it's less time for reflection and more time for action, okay, right? When Mars comes into Revati. Now we're gonna start to think of solutions. That's the current time period that we are in, but let's focus on Uttara Bhadrapada for now. Back in January 2019, the last transit of Mars in Aries, we were in the middle of a government shutdown. So Trump wanted funding, several $billion for the wall that he had promised his supporters. And I just kind of found it interesting that we are also experiencing a country shutdown at the same time, but that's most likely not Mars's solo influence. That has probably more to do so with Saturn in Saturn in Aquarius. It's just a combination of effects. During this time period, we also had more jobs being added to the economy, and we also had a few people announcing their candidacy for presidency. This time around, as Politico reported, federal appeals court on Friday ruled against Trump administration and its transfer of $2.5 billion from a military construction project to build sections of the U.S. border wall with Mexico. ruling it illegally sidestepped Congress, which gets to decide how to use the fund. We have this theme coming up with borders, immigration, and Trump deciding, how can I go about getting what I want, getting what I promise? More than likely, Trump is not going to have his wall built by election time November. It would probably take a miracle to get what he wanted accomplished. However, I'm sure he's still going to strive and do something in order to win more votes and to have his supporters backing them. We also have reportedly 4.8 million jobs gained in industries that were the hardest hit by the pandemic due to the reopening in several states. We also have Kanye West announcing his presidency. We also have the mayor of South Korea's body found in a park. I believe it was found. We also have Naya Riviera's body going missing in a lake, but then end up being found. Uttara Bhadrapada in my studies has shown me several things. One, it brings matters to light or hides issues, is a nakshatra that deals with people society considers outcasts or degenerates, or people who are ignored or cast away, or people who are controversial. It deals with people who are homeless, mentally ill, runaway, prostitutes, porn stars, illegal immigrants, or immigrants in general. It deals with troubled youth, drug dealers. Granted, Ashvini is more deal with drug dealers, Johns, and pimps. Okay, so this is a nakshatra that deals with the working class in a sense, which makes sense because that's what Saturn wants to rule, right? Saturn just wants to be around people where everyone's equal, everyone's on the same playing field. That's Saturn's energy. It says, hey, we're all equal, humble yourself, right? Saturn is the you're not special, there is no ego energy. Sorry for all this lightning. I don't know if you guys can even hear me. This is the worst time I could have picked a film. Let's get into the themes with Uttara Bhadrapada. One of the key themes for Uttara Bhadrapada with Mars going through this particular nakshatra is the fight for leadership. This whole nakshatra of Mars and Aries has this heavy theme of competing for leadership. You saw that we already had twice during Uttara Bhadrapada people sort of announcing their candidacy for presidency. In both nakshatras, Uttara Bhadrapada and Revati, there's this common theme for a shifting of power dynamics. Mars was in Aries when we were going through that election in 1988. Another common theme that we'll see with Uttara Bhadrapada, Mars going through that, is protests and employment. Now, I thought this was interesting because I didn't think about the employment aspect. Protest makes a lot of sense. Because when you have Saturn and Mars together, a lot of times I see people with this placement being super hard workers, but they're also workers who tend to be a little bit more blue collar, as well as people who can be part of a class which can be overlooked. It's almost like, and I don't like this term, but it's almost like a servitude class, which makes sense because Saturn rules being of service to someone. Like you're placing yourself in a humble position to serve someone. And then Mars itself is a soldier, so soldiers take orders from someone. So quite often we'll see somebody who has Mars and Saturn placements in their chart being someone who usually works for someone or works under someone. So it wasn't surprising that I saw this theme of protest when it comes to Saturn and Uttara Bhadrapada. In fact, in Tompkins Square Park in 1988, this was August 6th, Mars was in Uttara Bhadrapada when the police started a riot in their neighborhood known as a hangout for drug pushers, homeless people, young people, squatters, punks, you know what I mean? Like people like disregarded by society. And basically those people had sort of just cultivated this area. They hung out in this area a lot. The police were trying to invoke a curfew in order to get these people out of the park. And as a result, they said, hey, no, I don't think that's a good idea. We don't want to leave. It's not right. It's not okay that you'd push us out of this environment. We have a right to be in this park just as much as everyone else. There was no really legit reason to get them out of the park. It was just more like they weren't the type of people people wanted there. Police started a riot. They started attacking people, and the neighborhood people were walking by. They see all this chaos going on in the park. They see the police doing these horrendous acts towards people, and in fact, this led to over 100 complaints of police brutality being lodged following the riot, and the police ultimately were deemed responsible for the riot. In my Uranus and Taurus video, I mentioned that Saturn in Aquarius was going to bring about the main riots and protests. When Mars goes in Uttara Bhadrapada, the Saturn ruled nakshatra, that brings another spark, we want to amp up the energy real quick on this. We want to fight for our rights to just be equal. That's really what it is. They don't want that pressure and pushback. And I think Saturn's energy can sort of best be described by Kobe Bryant's quote: everything negative, pressure, challenges is an opportunity for me to rise. Whenever you're putting a situation that seems to bring about struggle energy, this energy where you feel like you have to fight back and push back, which is very like Saturnian energy, it's going to propel you to push yourself forward, to propel you to overcome something, to make you better. So I think that's the best way I can sort of describe Saturn energy. Another thing that I see along with this misfortune is this incredible endurance. In fact, I actually saw this theme particularly upon Uttara Bhadrapada, where it became known as like unbreakable, unsinkable. Even the actress who plays Kimmy Schmidt, she has her moon in Anuradha, which is a Saturn ruled nakshatra, and I thought that was funny because she's basically known for, you know, unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt. You can think of that when you think of planets going through Saturn ruled nakshatras, which is Pusha, Anuradha, and Uttara Bhadrapada. That Saturn wants that equal playing field for everyone. It wants to say, hey, you know, you're not above someone else. You don't deserve better treatment because of, you know, the color of your skin or your race or, you know, your gender or whatever. Another thing that had to do with employment, I think that's mainly to do due to Saturn's connection with the 10th and the 11th house, which is the 10th house being careers, goals, and the 11th house being income. So Aquarius and Capricorn both have to do with a sense of having some role to benefit not only society, but yourselves, to be able to take care of yourself, to bring something home, to bring home the bacon. But another common theme I saw was hacking and viruses. I wrote all this information down like a month ago because I was doing things in order with Uttara Bhadrapada, Revati, and all of that. I thought it was really funny that we had this hacking story about all these celebrities and I don't know, politicians. The reason I came to this conclusion that Mars and Saturn come together in order to create these stories about hacking and getting information and digging. Quite a few hackers had prominent placements, meaning their sun, moon, or ascendant in a Mars and Saturn ruled nakshatra. They would have Mars and Saturn either conjunct, Mars and Saturn in Mars or Saturn ruled nakshatras, Sun conjunct Saturn, Mars conjunct Sun, Moon conjunct Saturn, Moon conjunct Saturn, Mars, things like that. Not only that, but in 1988, we had Mars and Uttara Bhadrapada when the Morris worm, the first internet computer virus, which Robert Morris created in order to map the internet. What it ended up doing was infecting 2,000 computers within 15 hours. So that's just 2,000 computers in 15 hours. Now remember in 1988, internet was pretty small. What it did was make people really think about the psychological effects of the internet and the security that people were placing into it. Maybe this internet thing isn't as safe as we would like it to be. Ultimately, when we have a Saturn ruled nakshatra or a Saturn transit or a Saturn anything, it's trying to teach us a lesson. And the lesson here was, you know, don't put all your eggs in one basket. So they've learned not to connect all the computers to the same network. Because of this, they were able to think of a smarter way to go about building the internet system and structure. Another thing, which I don't think this particularly has to do with specifically Mars transit into Uttara Bhadrapada, but I did find it interesting that back in May 2019, Mars was in Uttara Bhadrapada, and around that time period, we were dealing with the H1N1 virus, you know, aka the swine flu. I was listening to a news stories around that time, and people, they kind of felt like they had a grip on everything. They kind of felt like things weren't as bad as it seems. And if you go back and you listen to the news stories where with Mars and Uttara Bhadrapada, which I gave you the dates, June 27th through July 17th, you had this sort of like conflict in stories still, at least in the US, where people were saying, oh, it's not too bad, it's not that whatever. And as we're getting closer to Revati, we start to realize the depth of this virus that's currently going on. And the same thing was happening around the time that we had Mars and Uttara Bhadrapada, when we had the H1N1 epidemic. People were saying, oh, it's gonna be fine, we're getting a handle on the situation. The WHO organization is saying, we don't wanna make it a pandemic yet, it doesn't seem that bad. As soon as Mars gets out of Uttara Bhadrapada, and a little bit towards the end of Revati, they were saying this is a full-blown pandemic. It is important to note, when we are in Mars and Uttara Bhadrapada, we do not have all the information, but we do have clues, and we can sort of try to make predictions from that. But I did want to mention that what I did see that was the same is the fact that we had Saturn in a Venus ruled nakshatra. Saturn was in Purva Phalguni when the first case was reported, and this time Saturn was in Purva Ashada when the first coronavirus case was reported. Two nakshatras having to do with socialization, social norms. We're dealing with how do we structure our environment so that we are treating everyone fairly and that we are a more productive and agreeable society. Before we move on to the next theme, this time around we had the mayor of Seoul in South Korea's body being found in Mayoral Park, as well as Naya Riviere went missing in a lake and ended up being found. Uttara Bhadrapada deals with missing people, missing places, missing things. It's also about hidden knowledge, you know, concept, materials. It's what we can't see. It's what we look for behind the scenes. And in fact, not only in Uttara Bhadrapada, but in Revati, we see a lot of people who, if they have placements in these two things, quite often they can be drawn into the film industry. I know another person who has Sun in Uttara Bhadrapada, and they are into sound design. They're into like animation and producing things and working behind the scenes. You may not know who they are or what they look like, but you may know their work. Another thing that happened was in November 11th, 1994, we had Mars in Uttara Bhadrapada when serial killer Dorothea, I think it's Puente, oh gosh, I can't even pronounce people's names, so if I just butchered that, I am so sorry. There was a body found in her lawn. Now, this was the first body, so we didn't know, you know, exactly what was going on. Another thing that I want to give you an example so you can really sort of hone in on the nature of Uttara Bhadrapada is we have people who have placements in Uttara Bhadrapada like Debbie Reynolds, whose Mars is in Uttara Bhadrapada. and her Mars rules her 7th house. So in astrology, your 7th house rules your marriage and it rules your spouse. When I was looking up her memoir, guess what it was called? Unsinkable. Isn't that so funny? So like I said, Saturn has that sort of unbreakable, unsinkable, you can't hurt me, I'm going through the fire, I can't be destroyed energy. Another thing that I thought was funny is, have you seen the movie Unbreakable? You know it stars Bruce Willis. Bruce Willis has his son in Uttara Bhadrapada, and it's so funny that he stars in the movie Unbreakable. But back to what I was saying about Debbie Reynolds having her Mars in Uttara Bhadrapada and it ruling her 7th house. So she had her husbands keep and hide things from her. One husband had an affair with Elizabeth Taylor, and this was Eddie Fisher. That's another thing that will happen with Uttara Bhadrapada and Revati. They can sort of rule affairs. In fact, didn't we have that affair come out with Jaden and Will during this time period? And that was a huge news story. But you're gonna get stories about affairs and love childs and all that stuff with, you know, Uttara Bhadrapada and especially Revati. But basically, she had one spouse who had an affair. She had another one who gambled all their money away and slept with prostitutes. So she just kept running into people who put her in circumstances which were humiliating. If you have placements in Saturn ruled nakshatras, you're gonna find yourselves put in positions where you are being looked down upon, where you are being sort of belittled, taken advantage of, and it feels like you're struggling, you're hurting, and you are being victimized. Actually, so there was this sexual assault case, which the movie The Accused, starring Jodie Foster, was based off of. And the victim's name was Cheryl Arajo. I think I'm saying that right, spelled Arajujo. Her case is seen as the template for blaming the victim. But what were you doing there? And what were you wearing that night? And why were you doing this? Her case became the template for that, where the whole town blamed her sexual assault on her. And guess where she has her son? In Uttara Bhadrapada, a Saturn ruled nakshatra. A lot of people who especially have Saturn placements will sort of be attacked for not really doing anything wrong. Actually, the term blaming the victim actually comes from the psychologist William Ryan. He coined the phrase in 1971, the book of that title, and he described victim blaming as an ideology used to justify racism, social injustice against Black people in the United States. Saturn has a very strong connection to African people or people of African descent. Okay, that's just another thing. So quite often, just even on a global scale, people of African descent will be victimized. I can't speak for all Black people, but from my perspective as a Black person, I've sort of gauged that other Black people just sort of feel just generally connected to other Black people regardless of their cultural background. Like for me, if I see someone Black in France, I just automatically feel that sense of like sisterhood. I do see it commonly among Black people. Like there will be channels, like I've seen this one channel, it's like Black in Asia or Black in Japan or Black in whatever. And one Black person could be from Spain and one Black person could be from Nigeria, and they're just like connecting. So I just noticed that sense of commonality, that Saturnian rulership where Black people, at least nowadays, they just kind of feel like they're connected and more level. As a Black person, you generally have similar experiences globally. It sounds like I'm going off a tangent, but I just wanted to say that Black people tend to have that connection to Saturn. Other Uttara Bhadrapada themes, humiliation, victim blaming, bullying, fighting against unfair authorities, arrests, capture, revealing, sexual harassment. I think there's actually that story that came out about the NFL. Granted, Revati also deals with sexual harassment. Another thing is both Revati and Uttara Bhadrapada especially have to do with nails. I don't know, I saw a lot, not a lot, but I saw a few nail artists have Uttara Bhadrapada placements, Venus, Sun, whatever they like the nails. Now, I hope I'm not like overwhelming you guys with information, but let us move on to Revati. That is where we currently are with our Mars transit. So Mars will be in Revati from July 18th through August 18th, and Mars will be direct in Revati. Last time Mars transited Revati was January 17th through February 4th, 2019. So here's some key events which occurred during that period. We were in the middle of the government shutdown, same when Mars was in Uttara Bhadrapada. Trump offered temporary protection for dreamers in exchange for wall funding. This compromise was rejected by Democrats who refused to negotiate until the government was reopened. On January 25th, Trump decided to end the shutdown. So it could be possible that a lot of things will open back up in November when Mars goes direct in Revati, mirroring the government shutdown. Revati, especially towards the end of Revati, wants to move forward. As soon as we start to get closer to Ashvini, that's when we start to see things moving forward and things starting to open up and step into a new chapter. During that time, there was an ongoing ban of trans people in the military. The Supreme Court allowed the ban to continue during litigation. Trans people can only serve as their original sex assignment as of April 12, 2019. Pete Buttigieg announced that he was running, becoming the first openly gay person to launch an intensive campaign. Roger Stone was charged with obstruction and witness tampering. And you saw how Roger Stone's case kind of came up back again when we were in Uttara Bhadrapada. And like I said, both Uttara Bhadrapada and Revati, you know, they kind of blend and do things together. We also had the Justice Department charge China company Huawei, I think I said that right, with racketeering and conspiracy / financial fraud. This company is the largest telecommunications equipment company in the world. US companies are banned from buying their equipment, and this caused tension from the US and China to increase. We're having a lot of tensions when it comes to foreign businesses, foreign democracy, dealing with other countries. When we are looking at a chart from a Vedic perspective, Revati falls into Pisces, and Pisces in general represents that purgatory energy where we're waiting for the other shoe to drop. And we have somebody like Margot Robbie who actually has her Mars in Revati, and she can quite literally hold her breath. I think it's for 5 minutes or something crazy. That's kind of like how Revati feels. Revati feels a little bit like holding your breath, like you don't know what's coming next and things aren't looking good. At this particular time, the government can't reach a consensus on what stores and businesses and should reopen and how, or should they even reopen, and you know, what's going on with this pandemic? How are we going to stop the spread of viruses, especially in the US, which is so behind, especially with other countries when it comes to really sort of taking control of the virus. And with Revati, with Mars being in Revati, there is likely to be an end to certain situations that have ceased activity, or we're going to increase production in activity that is more behind the scenes, which would be like looking for a cure, okay? So we're gonna put more energy into hospitals because, you know, Revati particularly will have that connection. Revati and Uttara Bhadrapada, I've noticed. I've seen people who will have placements in Revati. This is probably not the best example, but I think Jim Jones, you know, the cult leader, actually had his moon in Revati, and the way he met his wife was by working in a hospital. So he used to volunteer to actually help people. So a lot of Revati energy goes into doing charitable actions and working towards benefiting people. And actually I saw a lot of people who had their Mars in Revati in particular go about exerting their energy into funding charities. As we move towards Ashvini, we are going to see things open up more. I don't think it's going to be another shutdown. That's not very Ashvini energy. There is this fight for power, which is going on behind the scenes. That is something that is so prevalent, that came up so much with both nakshatras. There being this fight for control, this fight for domination, this fight to be in charge. There's a lot of behind the scenes attacks and a lot of different agendas floating around. A lot of digging for information, trying to expose someone, trying to make somebody look bad. If Revati's energy is used for good, it's used to empower others. If it's used for more sort of like obviously evil forces, then Revati is an energy which disempowers people. Back in 1988, Mars was in Revati when the Republicans chose George Bush as a presidential candidate. So he ended up winning the election. And not only that, but in 1944, when Mars was in Revati, we had Nelson Mandela and the ANC finally confirmed winners of South Africa's first post-apartheid election. And also in May 2009, Mars was in Revati when Jacob Zuma was sworn into president of South Africa. In 1988, Pakistan President Muhammad I can't even pronounce it. I'm so sorry. It's HAQ, so sorry for that. And the U.S. ambassador to Pakistan, Arnold Raphael, are killed in a plane crash. We also have John Lewis, congressman, a political activist, dying this times. We have this rise and fall of leadership. We have people being replaced. We have people coming into power. Actually, I believe election night happens when Mars is in Revati. US election day is on November 3rd. And at this time, Mars will be in Revati. And then the next time Mars will be in Revati is June 22nd, 2022 through June 26th, 2022. We won't have another shift in sort of leadership probably till then, at least on a world global scale. Another theme I saw with Mars and Revati was education, but I know that particularly has to do with more Uranus and Taurus energy, where we have this restructuring of education system, but Mars in Revati will bring about some changes. This time we have people fighting against when to put children back into school. So we see people fighting over what's the right decision to be made, because right now we have all the information. We know we have a virus out there. We know that it's spreading. We know that it can be sort of given to children, but we don't have all the information. We don't know exactly what we need to do in order to keep everyone safe. Mars in Revati is what it's going to do is it's going to make people reflect about the decisions they can make. It's also going to make people sort of look for a martyr for their cause. Like, let's say we have one state open up and we have maybe a kid die in school. Somebody who is anti putting their kids back in school is going to treat that situation as somebody being a martyr, or maybe martyr's not the best word, but as somebody being a symbol for their cause. And another person, like let's say they get an example of maybe some other country that's actually doing a good job having their kids back in school, and then they say, look at this country, they have these rules and things set in place. We need to be like that. We need to push forward. And so they're looking people to be a symbol for their cause. So that's another thing that happens. Basically, during this time, we're going to have a lot of arguments about education, just like last time when we had these arguments about teachers protesting for fair wages. Another thing that we're going to have is with foreign governments and policies. So Revati is going to amplify discussions with other governments, and I think it already has. I think we already had some issues going on with China again, and then I think China's trying to, they're going to fight back. You can expect a resurgence of communication on a global scale, and you can expect that there be a lack of compromise, because Mars is not a planet that's about compromise. In general, last time we had issues with the Dreamers and Borders and the Dream Act. The Dream Act, if you guys aren't familiar, The DREAM Act grants temporary conditional residency to qualifying immigrants who entered the United States as minors. More than likely, because it was addressed in Uttara Bhadrapada, it means that the issue's not finished. Had the Dreamer Act been addressed in Revati, then things would be finite. Another thing is it will bring up more policies and issues going on with immigration in general. In fact, I think I read an article about even people who had legally been accepted into the United States being in an awkward position where they can't officially like enter, or they're having issues receiving their green card as well due to all the things that are happening with various administration. You're going to see a lot of issues over this time having to do with immigration, having to do with, you know, the border wall probably come up again, having to do with foreigners in the country, having to do with fighting for like trade deals and all that stuff, and who do we want, what businesses we want in the United States. Do we want to do foreign business? Do we want stricter regulations? So you're going to see a lot of these things come up in the news as well. Another thing that comes up with Revati is convictions and executions. In 1988, we had Lyndon LaRoche being convicted of mail fraud. And he was a presidential candidate. In 1994, we had Illinois execute serial killer John Wayne Gacy by lethal injection. In May 9th, we had mass murderer Joel found guilty in New York, and his last name is spelled R-I-F-K-N, Rifkin. Chances are now we're going to have a lot of criminals. We're going to have some stories about criminals, well-known criminals being prosecuted, being on trial, being in the media, even some people possibly receiving injections, death penalties, being sentenced. Revati is that final blow, that final sort of like put that nail in the coffin. And then I said this before with Uttara Bhadrapada, where a lot of things come up missing. That happens in Revati as well. We deal with discovery of information and media as well. Another thing I saw quite common is hospitalization, not just of somebody being physically sick, but mentally sick as well. Just personally, I've saw people with this placement end up, you know, sometimes hurting themselves. So there may even be stories where people are, you know, actually hurting themselves or being put in situations where like emergency, you know, obviously mental health situations as well. Another thing I saw just on a personal scale of people having Mars in Revati is people will sometimes put themselves in isolation. I believe Jared Leto also has his Mars in Revati. And you know, at the start of the pandemic, this guy was in total isolation, right? So people with this placement will sometimes put themselves into isolation, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. So his isolation was more meditative and spiritual. So his actions went to his spiritual fulfillment. At this time, you can see a lot of people pulling away a little bit. His Revati will rule affairs, and same with Uttara Bhadrapada. They'll have like affairs and stuff. So you'll see a lot of stories of affairs and stuff, drama going on. And particularly Revati though, has a lot of controversial issues revolving around birth, pregnancy, but I've seen this for Uttara Bhadrapada too as well. Teen pregnancy having to do with pro-choice versus abolishing pro-choice, having children out of wedlock, testing people. What Revati people will do is they'll often test people around them to see what they're going to do. It's like, say, okay, I have this information about you. I'm going to say something to you, or I'm going to put you in a situation just so I can see what you're going to do. Another thing that happens with Revati is we have stalking. We have stories about witchcraft and black magic, voodoo, something like that. Hoodoo, mystical, underground. You could even see stories coming up like that in the media, having to reflect on the past, themes of drug addiction, themes of rejection, punishment, foreign dramas, creativity, sexual innuendos, body language, dance, August 19th through September 9th, Mars will be direct in Ashvini. Last time Mars was in Ashvini was February 5th to February 14th. 2019. During this time, there weren't too many like major events. I'm only talking about Mars in Aries. If we go to Mars in Taurus part of Ashvini, then we get more events. El Chapo found guilty, and he's a drug lord. Gary Montez Martin murders 5 people and injures 6 children in a mass shooting. That Revati Ashvini line comes about, the drug deals and all that stuff. In the intro, I mentioned how Ashvini had to do with this perpetration of violence, this forcefulness coming into light. When we have transits into Ashvini, especially Mars, we have more gun violence. So it's quite possible that that comes about during Ashvini, and if not gun violence, and just overall general violence. But I have noticed a specific theme of gun violence. I know during 1989, Mars transit into Aries, we had Bernard Godes was sentenced to 1 year in prison and $5,000 for shooting 4 young men on the New York subway. We also had Edward Purdy, who killed 5 children, wounded about 30, and then shoots himself in Stockton, California. And then we also had a Hispanic Miami police officer shoots and kills a black motorcyclist in an Overtown section in Miami, Florida, starting 3 days of riots. There can be an increased amount of rioting when we get into Mars being in Ashvini. Mars in Ashvini, what it's doing is it's bringing about more physical violence, more physical aggression, as well as more outrage, because Mars is a very reactive planet. On a more personal level, I know a lot of the topics that I've been mentioning have been like really tense. However, I wanted to say that Ashvini is a great time to start something new and to start doing something spontaneous. And if you're somebody who really likes intensive research, or you're planning something, this is a really great time to do it, because Ashvini and other Ketu ruled nakshatras can really bring about better research probably in this nakshatra than even any nakshatra placement. Ketu ruled nakshatras are really great for researching. From what I've seen, they can be very intensive and they can be highly detailed. And you can even look at people who have this placement naturally. Steve Jobs, Kanye West, Tyra Banks had this. And so, with Steve Jobs, he had this placement. You can sort of look at his technical work and his inventions. And with Kanye West, despite what you may think of, his personality, even Steve Jobs had kind of like a, rough personality. Kanye West had this placement, and he became like an innovator for his genre of rap music. So when Kanye West stepped into the rap scene, he came through with, the polo and the backpack. And I think at the time, gangster rap was like the real thing. So for have someone come in from a middle class background with a polo and a backpack, it just became like this really big, innovative thing. And then he had his own style, and he created his own beats, and he was like the master of his craft. And he was just, Ashvini is a great time when Mars enters it to pour your energy into something that's very much original, very much your idea, and just very much innovative. So original. Even Tyra Banks is technically, I think her presence is more innovative, right? Because she became the first African-American woman to be on the cover of like Sports Illustrated. She's all about mastering or bringing about different looks and innovations into the modeling industry. Like she's starting modeling world. She started Top Model, and I remember watching Top Model in high school, and there was nothing like it at the time. If you have noticed with the 3 people I've named, the 3 kind of most popular people with this, they do all have that sort of reputation for being bullies. So along with their ability to be innovative, they can be also very much a little bit nasty or a little bit rude. You can find on your personal life when Mars is in Ashwini that people are a little bit more hot-headed, people are less likely to see your point of view, people may be insane and doing some nasty actions towards you. So I just want you to be alert. I want to say when Mars was in Ashwini in 1989, we had George Bush being sworn into presidency. I do want to give some other dates. So Mars will go retrograde in Ashwini on November 9th, and it will be retrograde until November 13th. It's on October 4th that Mars will enter Revati, retrograde obviously. But when we see retrograde energy, we obviously just have us going back and reflecting and redefining things. I think that's what a lot of retrograde energy basically does. But while it's in Ashwini, we're going to look back on what has led us to those aggressive reactions. So from October 4th, Mars will be retrograde in Revati to November 13th, and that's when Mars goes direct in Revati. When we have this retrograde energy where it's like, okay, well, let's look back on all the things we've done while we're in Revati, then yeah, we're gonna look back on how people ran their elections or how these people came into power and what influences they did and their actions towards the justice system and things that have been going on there. And we're going to reflect back on all the gossip and the affairs and the sexual harassment. It's going to make us redo our actions or think of another way of addressing situations. Everything I basically just listed when it came to Revati, with all the, you know, education factors, with all the things having to do with convictions, foreign governments and foreign policies, we're going to look back on that. And then I do want to mention Mars will be in Revati until December 25th. So once again, those Revati themes are coming back up. Don't be alarmed if you see any more like violence or if you see any more harsh actions towards each other or people saying some outlandish or outrageous things. We're going to have a lot of people saying some things that are going to get them in trouble. When we go back, we're going to see them maybe even reverse what they said, or maybe even just say, you know what? I didn't say that at all. What I really meant was this, this, and this, and this. Maybe there were some miscommunications happening, which is very highly possible when we have Mars in Revati. A lot of miscommunications can be going on just because with Revati, the communication becomes internal. Most of the speech will be in somebody's head. And then from December 5th, December 26th onward, we're gonna have Mars and Ashwini. So we have that revisitation of that electric energy where, you know, Mars is firing off. It's like something new, let's do something new, let's do something. One thing I wanna say is because election night, I believe, happens when Mars is retrograde, more than likely there's going to be maybe some sort of like recount, revote, revisit thing. When something's done during a retrograde or something happens during a retrograde, things get a little bit funky. Whatever happened during that time, during election night, is going to be revisited and it's going to come back up in the news in June 2022. So there's going to be some revelations and things being revealed in 2022 about what's happening, what's going to happen in the election this year. I mean, I know that's a long ways away, but you know, maybe mark this video or something. Last time Mars was in Aries this long, the majority of its retrograde was in Uttara Bhadrapada. We had NASA resume flights, and we already know Uttara Bhadrapada has that connection to space, and if we don't know that, I'm letting you know now. Uttara Bhadrapada has that connection to space. The Space Needle in Seattle, I believe that was built during this time that Mars was in Uttara Bhadrapada. So there was this huge scientific convention going on about innovations and guessing what's going to be happening in the future.
Get your chair, pack up your family, and head for the best in Seattle.
Welcome to the future and all the wonders of the 21st century in the greatest preview the world has ever seen.
Take a way ahead, look at tomorrow, just as if you were there.
There it is! At last, the Seattle World's Fair. Crossroads of the universe.
The Century 21 Man in the Space Age Exposition.
Let's have a closer view.
This time Mars is in Revati, so the energy does get a little bit more intense when it comes to political debates and leadership. It should be similar presidential battles and tactics to sort of undermine each other, recounting and rejecting ballots. I think that's even going on right now, where a lot of people who voted in their ballots are being rejected because it didn't make it to the centers on time. That's more than likely going to even happen now with these elections, especially for minorities. More than likely there's going to be a lot more voter suppression. Also, I think because we have so much Revati energy, for this Mars, it's important to pay attention really to what's happening now. Everything that's going on around you is going to repeat itself during the Mars retrograde energy. Some more leaders come forward and rise to power. I know a lot is going on in regards to Portland and people going, you know, being put into unmarked vehicles and stuff like that. That stuff is going to pop up again, maybe having to reveal and let people know what exactly is going on. Even having that situation intensify. I know a lot of leaders' competence is being questioned. So that's more than likely going to come up again when Mars goes retrograde and Revati. Now, the last time Mars went retrograde was June 26, 2018 through August 27, 2018. Whenever a planet goes retrograde, it kind of thinks a little bit back to the last time it was retrograde. It was during this time period that we were reflecting over Russia's influence in the presidential election. So there's a good chance during this Revati retrograde period that we start bringing up foreign powers being connected to our election again. There was also the nomination of Brett Kavanaugh. So that was a lot of controversy, especially since we had a lot of stories about his sexual assault going on. There could be some questionability about the integrity about people in power. We also had the ending of Trump and Putin summit. We could have some political leaders even meeting as well, or even the thoughts and the conversation regarding two political rulers meeting and what they may have discussed or something like that. We had a 12 million bailout for farmers. Things like that can come up again, like bailouts for people who are in a difficult position. And then we also had an 11-year-old boy hacking the replica of a voting site. There can be a lot of stories about hacking a voting, things having to do with some kind of misconstruedness regarding the voting system. There can be some unfortunate events and maybe freak accidents going on around this time period as well. One more date I want to give you guys. I did want to mention one fixed star, which is Vertex, and this happens at 27.51 Aries. It has an orb of 1.30, and this is like about January 1st to January 2nd. This fixed sign placement, when Mars comes here, a lot of the times people can be blinded by anger. They can just be blinded by rage and really act impulsively. So January 1st, January 2nd, it does two things. Either somebody is like really freaked out and they have a stressful reaction and they just start to panic and they just kind of curl. Like if you ever just seen somebody get mad and they can't control it and they just start screaming obscenities, they start attacking, they start lashing out, they feel like they need to protect themselves, okay? There can be that explosiveness and anger. So a lot of times you have people who are known for being very angry and reactionary, kind of getting to a point where they bubble up and boil over and become very, very explosive when this fixed star comes into play. And even in your own lives, you can maybe find people just being very irritating to you or very rude to you, or maybe even yourself is getting a little bit worked up. You just feel this bubble up of frustration. It becomes like a boiling point. Another thing is what this can do is it can bring about righteous anger. So some event can take place and you kind of feel compelled to do something about it and feel like you need to act on it. You need to do something about it. You need to be the one that comes together and, you know, ends child labor. Other Ashvini themes is innovation, impulsive reactions, gangs, hard drugs, lack of boundaries, controversial, brutal, and problematic is the main word that came up. Theatrical. This can also apply to police as well. So it can be like an increase in police or military like force. That is pretty much everything I think I've covered when it comes to Mars and Aries transit. I've let you know what to expect. A lot of stuff is going on in the world and it's causing everyone to be very tense in the world. All right? So that is all I have for you guys, and I hope to see you next video. I did want to tell you guys that I will, like I said, I'm going on a 2-week vacation. I'm going to post this video and 2 more tarot videos, and then I'll be on vacation for 2 weeks after that. So while I'm posting those tarot videos, that is when the website will be open. So I should have the website open this week and next week. I'll let you know in the description box below, as always, or in the comment section. So that is all I have for you guys, and I'm so happy that you guys watched my video, and feel free to subscribe, like, and comment, and I will see you next time.